If you spend any time around royal news online, you've probably seen a headline like this one: a secret decree, signed in the dead of night, supposedly handing King Charles's authority straight to Prince William. These videos show up constantly, always urgent, always unsourced, always missing the one thing real news actually has: a named official, a real document, or a palace statement anyone can check. The real story of what's happening to the British monarchy right now doesn't need any of that invented drama. It's genuinely significant on its own, it's fully documented, and once you understand how the system that actually governs royal succession works, it's arguably more interesting than the fake version, because it shows a nearly 100-year-old legal framework quietly doing exactly the job it was built for. Let's start at the beginning, because the real story does begin with a genuine health crisis. In January 2024, King Charles was admitted to hospital for a procedure to treat a benign, non-cancerous enlarged prostate, a common and usually straightforward condition for a man his age. During that same course of treatment, doctors noticed something separate that concerned them enough to run further tests. On the 5th of February 2024, Buckingham Palace confirmed the results publicly. The king had been diagnosed with a form of cancer. The palace was careful to clarify it was not prostate cancer. And to this day, more than 2 years later, the exact type of cancer has never been publicly disclosed, a private medical detail the family has chosen to keep to themselves, which is entirely their right. What the palace did make public was that Charles would begin outpatient treatment immediately, and that, on the advice of his doctors, he would postpone public-facing duties for a period while that treatment got underway, though he would continue with state business and paperwork privately, behind the scenes. For several weeks after that announcement, Charles was largely out of public view. A genuinely unusual sight for a working monarch just over a year into his reign. Then, on the 30th of April 2024, he made his first public appearance since the diagnosis, visiting a cancer treatment centre in London, using the moment deliberately to encourage early diagnosis and to speak candidly about his own experience with treatment. From that point on, Charles gradually rebuilt a fuller public schedule, resuming state visits, ceremonial duties, and public engagements over the following months, all while continuing his medical treatment privately in the background, a pattern the palace has broadly maintained ever since. Public transparency about the fact of ongoing treatment, paired with genuine privacy about its specific medical details. That balance was tested again roughly a year later. In March 2025, King Charles was briefly hospitalized after experiencing what the palace described as side effects related to his ongoing cancer treatment. Officials were quick to frame it as a minor setback rather than a serious decline, and Charles returned to Windsor Castle shortly afterward to continue recovering privately, again resuming public duties once he felt ready. It's worth pausing on that specific choice of words, minor setback, because it's genuinely characteristic of how this entire situation has been managed publicly, measured, deliberately unsensational language from the palace, consistently avoiding the kind of dramatic framing that tends to dominate. Less careful coverage of the same events. Despite that hospital stay, Charles's public role continued at a level many observers found genuinely striking for a man undergoing active cancer treatment. In September 2025, he personally hosted a state visit from the President of the United States, a major, logistically demanding ceremonial undertaking involving state banquets, formal processions, and hours of public engagements, all carried out by the king himself rather than delegated to someone else. It stood as a clear, visible signal that, whatever the private reality of his treatment looked like day to day, Charles remained fully capable of carrying out the highest-profile duties of his role. Then, in December 2025, came the update that's actually driving most of the genuine, well-sourced news coverage about the King's health right now. In a recorded video message, Charles announced that, on the advice of his medical team, his cancer treatment schedule would be reduced going into 2026. According to Buckingham Palace, he had responded exceptionally well to treatment over the preceding 2 years, and his care was moving into what officials specifically termed a precautionary phase, language that suggests active, intensive treatment stepping back in favor of ongoing monitoring. It's worth being precise here, because a lot of secondary coverage blurred this detail, neither Charles nor the palace ever used the word remission. The official language was notably careful, encouraging without over-promising, consistent with how this entire 2-year story has been communicated. From the very start, it's worth pausing here to appreciate just how unusual that level of openness actually is by royal historical standards, because the last time a reigning British monarch had cancer, the public wasn't told at all. In September 1951, King George VI, Elizabeth II's father and a heavy lifelong smoker, had an entire lung removed after doctors discovered a carcinoma. The palace at the time didn't use the word cancer even once. Official statements referred only to an operation for unspecified structural abnormalities, language deliberately chosen to avoid a word that, in that era, carried enormous social stigma. Astonishingly, by most historical accounts, the king himself was never directly told he had cancer either. He appeared to be recovering, resumed some public duties, and then died suddenly 5 months later, in February 1952. Officially of a coronary thrombosis, a blood clot, which was medically accurate but left out the broader picture of a body already severely weakened by major cancer surgery. Compare that directly to 2024, a Buckingham Palace statement naming the word cancer explicitly on the record within days of diagnosis, followed by 2 years of regular, if carefully worded, public updates on treatment progress. Whatever else you make of how the modern monarchy communicates, it represents a genuinely dramatic shift from an institution that once considered a monarch's own cancer diagnosis too sensitive to share even with the monarch, toward one willing to put it in an official press statement within days. That same instinct toward more openness also shows up in a second, closely related story from the same year, one that unfolded almost entirely in parallel with the king's own diagnosis. In March 2024, just weeks after Charles's announcement, Catherine, Princess of Wales, revealed that she too had been diagnosed with cancer, discovered incidentally during abdominal surgery earlier that year. Like the king, the palace has never disclosed the specific type. Catherine underwent a course of preventative chemotherapy through much of 2024, stepping back from public duties for several months before announcing in September 2024 that she had completed chemotherapy, and then, in January 2025, sharing directly on social media that she was officially in remission, describing it as a relief, while acknowledging she was still adjusting to what she called a new normal. 2 members of the same family, diagnosed with cancer within roughly 6 weeks of each other, both choosing to disclose it publicly, both giving periodic updates without oversharing. Private medical specifics, both eventually returning to duties on their own timeline. It's genuinely one of the more remarkable and consistently under-discussed real stories about the royal family in recent years, almost entirely overshadowed in casual online coverage by exactly the kind of invented succession drama this video started by debunking. Now to the second half of this story, the part that actually involves Prince William, and it's every bit as real as Charles's treatment, just considerably less dramatic than any invented decree. Over the past 2 years, William has genuinely, measurably taken on more of the monarchy's public workload, and in the spring of 2026, that shift became formal in at least one specific, documented way. William and his wife Catherine became grantors of royal warrants, a real institutional role handed to them by Charles, giving them formal authority to award the royal warrant of appointment. The official mark that lets a business publicly advertise itself as a supplier to the royal household, provided that business has supplied goods or services consistently for at least 5 of the past 7 years. It's a genuinely meaningful responsibility tied to a centuries-old royal tradition, and it's exactly the kind of gradual, functional handover of specific duties that's been quietly happening throughout Charles's reign, not through any secret paperwork, but through entirely public, formally announced changes. At the same time, and this is worth including precisely because it undercuts any narrative about William aggressively seizing control, a fair amount of the actual royal commentary in 2026 has gone in almost the opposite direction, with some royal watchers openly criticizing William for not doing enough. Commentators have used pointed language, one widely quoted royal expert going as far as invoking the nickname work-shy Wills. arguing that with his father managing a serious ongoing illness, now is precisely the moment William should be visibly increasing his own public engagements to demonstrate his readiness as the future monarch. Whatever you make of that criticism, it's genuinely difficult to reconcile a media narrative of William being urged by royal commentators to do more work with a competing narrative of William secretly seizing total palace control in the middle of the night. Both stories cannot be true, and only one of them is backed by anything resembling a source. So if there's no secret decree, how does the British monarchy actually handle a situation where the king is unwell and can't, or shouldn't, personally carry out every single duty of the job? This is where the real story gets genuinely interesting, because Britain has had a formal legal system for exactly this situation in place since 1937, and it has nothing to do with secret documents signed at midnight. The mechanism is called Councillors of State, and it comes from Section 6 of the Regency Act 1937. It allows the reigning monarch to formally delegate certain specific royal functions, not the crown itself, just certain functions, to a small group of pre-designated substitutes, whenever the monarch is either travelling abroad or temporarily unwell. Under the original 1937 law, the Councillors of State are automatically the monarch's spouse, plus the next 4 people in line to the throne, provided they're at least 21 years old, or 18 if they happen to be the direct heir. For King Charles, that meant the original list included Queen Camilla, Prince William, and then, moving down the line of succession, Prince Harry, followed by Prince Andrew's daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, simply because that's who the law's strict succession order formula produced, regardless of whether those individuals were actively working members of the royal family. Recognizing that this created an obviously awkward situation, since several of those named councillors don't carry out public royal duties at all. Parliament passed the Councillors of State Act in 2022, specifically adding Princess Anne and Prince Edward as additional, alternative councillors, so the king would have working royals available to call on, instead of being legally restricted to whoever happened to be next in the bloodline. What can the Councillor of State actually do? Quite a lot of routine constitutional business, but not everything, and definitely not immediate palace control. A specific legal document called Letters Patent spells out exactly which functions are being delegated at any given time, and it typically covers things like attending meetings of the Privy Council, signing routine government paperwork, and formally receiving the credentials of new foreign ambassadors, generally with 2 councillors required to act jointly rather than any single person acting alone. Certain core constitutional powers are explicitly excluded from ever being delegated this way at all, including things like dissolving Parliament or appointing a new Prime Minister, precisely because those decisions are considered too significant to hand off through a routine administrative mechanism, even temporarily. This system isn't some obscure legal technicality either. It's been used constantly, and often quite publicly, for decades. Queen Elizabeth II relied on councillors of state regularly throughout her reign, most commonly whenever she travelled overseas and needed royal business back home to keep running smoothly in her absence. One of the clearest, most visible examples of this entire system in action actually involves Charles directly, and it happened years before he ever became king. On the 10th of May 2022, a 96-year-old Queen Elizabeth, dealing with ongoing mobility problems, missed the state opening of Parliament for the first time in almost 6 decades, an event she'd personally attended nearly every year of her 70-year reign. Rather than cancel it, the government simply used the existing legal framework. Charles, then still Prince of Wales, formally delivered the speech in her place, at Elizabeth's explicit direction, reading out the government's legislative agenda while carefully using the phrase, Her Majesty's government will, making it unmistakably clear the whole time that he was speaking on the reigning monarch's behalf, not replacing her. It's a genuinely useful example precisely because it shows exactly how this kind of transition actually happens in real life, publicly, formally through existing law, announced well in advance with absolutely no ambiguity about who still actually holds the crown. None of this is theoretical machinery that only exists on paper either. It's been invoked so routinely over the decades that it barely makes headlines when it happens. which is arguably the clearest sign of how well-functioning and unremarkable the real system is compared with the version that goes viral. Elizabeth II used councillors of state on dozens of occasions throughout her 70-year reign, almost always for the same mundane reason. An overseas tour meant she'd be out of the country for weeks at a time, and routine state paperwork back home still needed a legitimate royal signature. It's a system built entirely around ordinary logistics, not crisis management, which is precisely why it's never generated the kind of dramatic secret decree headline this video opened by debunking. Nobody writes a viral video titled "Queen Signs Routine Delegation Paperwork Before Trip to Canada," even though that's essentially what was happening. A full regency is an entirely different and considerably more serious legal step, reserved specifically for situations involving total incapacity rather than a manageable illness. And it comes with genuine institutional safeguards specifically designed to prevent exactly the kind of unilateral, secretive action that shows up in viral rumour videos. Under the Regency Acts, a regency can only be formally declared if the monarch is either under 18 years old or has become permanently or totally incapable, whether mentally or physically, of performing their royal duties. Crucially, the monarch does not get to simply decide this and sign the document alone. The law requires a formal declaration of incapacity, and that declaration has to be certified in writing by at least 3 of a specific, named group of senior officials: the monarch's spouse, the Lord Chancellor, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Lord Chief Justice of England, and the Master of the Rolls. Only once that formal, multi-person certification process has actually happened does a regent, the next adult in the line of succession, take over the sovereign's full royal functions. There is no version of British constitutional law in which one person can privately, secretly hand over palace control with a single signature at any hour of the day or night. The entire system was deliberately built generations ago specifically to prevent that exact scenario. It's worth asking, briefly, why the invented version of this story spreads so much faster and further than the real one. Because the answer says as much about how content gets made and rewarded online as it does about the monarchy itself. A genuine update, King continues treatment, Palace uses careful language, no remission confirmed yet, is accurate, but it's slow, cautious, and doesn't resolve into a satisfying twist. A headline claiming a secret decree handing over immediate palace control, on the other hand, offers exactly what algorithms and human curiosity both reward: urgency, secrecy, a clear winner and loser, and a definitive-sounding resolution to an ongoing, genuinely uncertain situation. None of that requires a single verifiable fact, just a title dramatic enough that people feel compelled to click before checking whether Buckingham Palace, or literally any mainstream outlet with reporters actually covering the royal family, has said anything of the sort. They haven't. And the individual channels and sites producing these videos tend to follow an easily recognizable pattern once you know to look for it. Near-identical formatting, interchangeable royal names, slotted into the same 3 or 4 dramatic templates, no name sources, no linked statements, and often multiple contradictory secret decrees published by the same accounts within days of each other, each one claiming to be the real story. Put all of that together, and the real, fully documented version of this story looks like this. A king diagnosed with cancer in February 2024 who has been unusually transparent about the existence of his treatment while remaining private about its specifics, who suffered one clearly acknowledged setback in March 2025, who nonetheless personally hosted a full state visit as recently as September 2025, and who announced in December 2025 that his treatment is being scaled back on his doctor's advice. All while a nearly 90-year-old legal framework quietly continues doing exactly what it was designed to do, distributing specific, clearly defined duties to councillors of state whenever needed, exactly as it's done for Queen Elizabeth dozens of times before him. Meanwhile, his son and heir has been formally handed a genuine new institutional role in the royal warrant system, is facing public criticism from royal commentators for allegedly not doing enough, rather than praise for doing too much, and remains, by every available legal and constitutional measure, exactly what he's always been, the heir, not the king. No decree, no midnight signature, no secret transfer of immediate palace control. Just a working, functioning, occasionally opaque but fundamentally transparent institution, managing a real illness the way it was legally built to, in full public view, for anyone willing to look past the version, with a scarier headline.